Hello and welcome to a new vlog and ship video, and today we're taking a look at the first 2 days on board of the AIDAprima. We are going from Kiel to Copenhagen, and this whole cruise will bring us from Kiel and Copenhagen on to Gothenburg and Aarhus and back to Kiel. Here on the map you can see the route of the first 2 days. We're starting, for me personally, quite traditional with a drink at the Gosh Sylt in Kiel. I always try to be in Kiel a bit earlier than I have to in case something goes wrong with the train, and then I'm always waiting the Gosh Sylt right next to the water and next to the train station. From there it's a walk of about 20 to 25 minutes to get to the cruise terminal, and took about the same time to get on board, so embarkation was quite fast. Here we can see our beautiful cabin on deck 5. I opted for a cabin that most people try to avoid, close to the engines, close to the waterline, and with a metal covered balcony. I do like the sound of the engines, so I can sleep better when I hear the engines, so I like cabins close to the engine, and I like balconies where I do not have a view of the promenade, but I can actually look straight down to the water, which is only possible on the Prima here on deck 5. The wardrobe is a bit smaller than in other cabins, but I would say it's enough space for 2 passengers for around 1 or 1.5 weeks. There's a comfortable bed, a nice sofa, a big TV and a proper desk. Only downside of the cabin is the amount of power sockets, because there are only those 2 power sockets here at the desk, but there are no power sockets at the bed. As I mentioned, the balcony is metal covered, but it still has a glass railing, so you have a nice view. You have more privacy than in a normal balcony. What was quite interesting is this door here on the right side. It's a metal door, and it's not only door to the next balcony, but it can also be closed when there is really bad weather. The regular balcony door is not strong enough to withstand strong waves in a very big storm, so when there's a very bad weather they will close the door. You will not have a balcony then, but you will still have those 2 windows. You still have an ocean view, but the balcony will be closed and it's perfectly safe. But that only happens when there's really bad weather. After doing the digital safety drill, we went to the Brauhaus to try the beers that were brewed on board and have some nice lunch, and in the late afternoon it was already time to leave Kiel and head out into the Baltic Sea in the direction of Copenhagen. We cannot take the shortest way to Copenhagen because only smaller ships can use the direct way due to shallow waters, so we have to go all the way around, and we are going past Copenhagen in a northwestern direction, and then we're going down to Copenhagen coming from the north. But to start our journey we first have to leave the Kieler Förde. That would translate to Kiel Fjord. It's not a fjord like you would imagine, but it's called the Kiel Fjord. Here in the Kiel Fjord we also have the Kiel Canal, which we can see here, but as you can see it's quite hazy, and that is because of Sahara sand, which was quite strong on this day, so we did not have the best view. On our way to leave the Kiel Fjord we are also sailing past Laboe with a famous Marine Ehrenmal, the Laboe Naval Memorial, and I will now let you enjoy the view of our departure out of the Kiel Fjord without commentary. The pilot is leaving us now, and we're out in the so-called Bay of Kiel, which is the water between Germany and Denmark here in the Baltic Sea. We're heading to Denmark now. It's not too far until we already reach Denmark, but in the meantime the ferry to Gothenburg overtook us as she has to be in Gothenburg. At the same time we have to be in Copenhagen, so she has to go a little bit faster than us. So here she's overtaking us, and for us it was time for the first dinner on board. We reserved a table at the French Kiss restaurant, which is included, but you need to make a reservation as it's always experiencing a quite high demand. But it's worth making that reservation because the food is fantastic, and as I said, it's already included. Late in the evening it was time for another highlight of the cruise as we are reaching the Great Belt Bridge. With a span of around 1.6 kilometers, it is one of the longest suspension bridges in the world. It's almost 6.8 kilometers long, and the clearance is 65 meters, so there's not too much space for our AIDAprima, so that's quite spectacular. So we had to stay awake until around midnight to see the passage of the Great Belt Bridge, which is connecting the Danish islands of Zealand and Funen. But after that it was time to go to bed, and in the next morning when we woke up we were already close to Copenhagen. During breakfast we docked at the Ocean Quay, which is the cruise terminal which is a bit further away from the city center. There are two possibilities to dock in Copenhagen. There's the Lange Linie and the Ocean Quay. Lange Linie is getting less frequently used and only used for small ships. Most ships are now docking at the Ocean Quay, but further away from the city center. From there you can either take a shuttle bus of your cruise company, but there are also a lot of other options. Usually there's also a shuttle from the city which will bring you to the station Orient Quay, where you can change for the metro, and close to Terminal 1, depending on where your ship is docked, a few minutes away from your ship, there is also the official bus stop Ocean Quay, and there you can take a regular bus also to the Orient Quay. From there you can take the Metro Line 4 into the city center, which is quite interesting as it is a driverless light metro. So I would always recommend taking the first door of the train and heading right to the front, because there you can feel like the driver. You have this fantastic view, which is quite interesting. There are several stops you can use. For example, you can get off at Marmorkirchen, which is close to the Marble Church and Castle Amalienborg. Next stop is Kongens Nytorv. There you are close to the famous Nyhavn, the famous touristic harbor of Copenhagen. Next stop then is Gammelstrand, which is close to the shopping street Strøget. Or you could also get off at Rådhuspladsen, which is close to the City Hall, or at the main station, which is close to the amusement park Tivoli. Unfortunately, Tivoli was still closed, so we walked past it, heading to Christiansborg Castle, which you could also reach from the station Gammelstrand. There you can see the royal horses, and you can go all the way through the castle, because the square in front of the castle is open and accessible for everybody. Right behind the castle there is the street Vettstranden, and from there you can start a boat tour. There are two locations where you can start a boat tour. It's Vettstranden and the Nyhavn. As Nyhavn is the most touristic place in the city, most people will start in Nyhavn, so I recommend starting a bit earlier in Vettstranden, and then you can choose the perfect and the best seat. As we were traveling in winter, but it was the first nice day, the boats were still closed, but they have a few outdoor seats, and everybody wanted to have a seat outdoor, so those were already taken before the ship arrived in Nyhavn. So my recommendation is starting at the first stop, which usually is Vettstranden. We opted for the longer cruise in the winter season. There's only one of those per day. The other cruises are only 1 hour. We are traveling a bit longer and we're gonna see a bit more. Here we can see the beautiful Nyhavn. I think you can clearly see why this is one of the most touristic places in the city, as it is one of the most beautiful parts of Copenhagen. Absolutely worth a visit, even though it's quite busy and touristy, still quite interesting. We will firstly see a few things that you can also see with a shorter cruise. We were going through an area with very interesting architecture, very nice buildings, but later on we will also see a lot of things that you usually cannot see from the regular cruise. Here we are going past a very interesting ship. It's called Georgstage, and this is one of the oldest training sailing vessels in the world. It's already built in 1934, and according to our fantastic guide, it's quite rare to see the sailors in the sailing masts. So that was also quite interesting to see. And now we're heading to another very interesting part, and this is not possible to see during a regular boat tour through Copenhagen. We are visiting Tre Kroner, Tre is a seafort at the entrance to the harbor of Copenhagen, and it is located on an island, so it's hard to reach. Only in the summer season there are excursions to that island, but in the wintertime it's quite difficult to get there without a private boat. But with our tour we got there at least to take a look at it. We went into the port of Tre, turned around there and continued on. Here we can see one of the harbor buses, and you can use those with your regular ticket for public transport in Copenhagen. We'll tell you a bit more about them later on. Speaking about the ticket, if you want to travel with public transport in Copenhagen, I would recommend downloading an app called Reisebillet, where you can book your ticket conveniently in the app, so you do not have to try to find a ticket machine. And with these tickets you can also use the harbor buses. They will give you a free harbor cruise, but of course without commentary, and that would have been quite sad if we wouldn't have the commentary of our guide, because it was fantastic. As you know, I'm working on ships myself, so I'm listening to a lot of guides, and most of the time I'm not that interested anymore, as I've heard many stories, I've heard all the jokes, but this guide was actually fantastic and I listened to him from the beginning to the end, and I didn't want to miss a thing because it was very, very good. So that was a fantastic tour. We learned a lot about Tre, but of course also about the other areas we are visiting. Now we're continuing on to the Nordhavn, Northern Harbor, which used to be the harbor of Copenhagen, but now it's a modern part of the city with fantastic architecture, very sustainable architecture, very interesting architecture, as they are using old buildings from the harbor and giving them a new purpose. So it's quite interesting, and also here we learned a lot about those buildings before continuing on to an older part of the former harbor of Copenhagen, which is still used as the ferry harbor. Here we can see the ferry to Oslo. Used to be a DFDS ferry, now it's the Go Nordic cruise line with a Nordic crown, a very beautiful ship. I used to travel on that ship when it was sailing for DFDS, but hopefully I can also go back now with a new owner. Probably they changed a few things inside, it was renovated, so still interesting. It's a fantastic ship, and it's comparable to the ferries from Kiel to Oslo, as it is also a cruise ferry, so it does not feel like a ferry but like a cruise ship. And now we're getting to the most famous tourist attraction in Copenhagen. And our guide was already jokingly, proudly explaining that it is only the second most disappointing tourist attraction in Europe. We're talking about the Little Mermaid. When you take a very close look in this shot, you can see the Little Mermaid in between those huge amount of tourists, which actually, compared to summer season, is a small amount of tourists. But it is tiny, it's hard to see, it's absolutely not spectacular, and I'm always recommending going there once so that you know why you never have to go back there, and it's not worth seeing. By the way, if you're interested, number one in the list of the most disappointing tourist attractions, and I do highly agree with that, is Mannequin Piss in Brussels, which is a tiny statue at a tiny fountain in Brussels. Our tour is now coming to an end, and right at the end of the tour there's another very interesting part, as we have to go through a narrow tiny bridge, the Stormbruen. As you can see, there are only a few centimeters to each side of space. It even looks like we're too big to get through it, but it actually fits. But that's not all. Right behind the bridge there is a sharp turn to the right, which also only gives centimeters of space for the large tourist boats here, so that was a spectacular end of our cruise. After that, it's just a few minutes of walking until we reach the famous Strøget shopping street with a lot of nice places, and my personal recommendation is a shopping center called Illum, and there you have this beautiful architecture which you can see here, but there is also a rooftop terrace. We visited a cafe called Original Coffee, and there you have this French-like small balcony where you can enjoy a nice cup of coffee, for example, or a drink with a view of Copenhagen. We then walked on to the Marble Church, which is also worth seeing. You can head inside for free, so even if you're not interested in churches, still you can take 5 minutes to take a look at the beautiful architecture of this building. Right next to it there's also Amalienborg Castle, where we could watch the change of guards, which was also very interesting to see. And then we walked back to the Nyhavn. Right at the front of Nyhavn there is the station of the water buses. It actually works like a bus. So as I said, with your regular public transport ticket you can also use those buses. And the quite nice thing is that the buses are also going to the Orientkai, so you can take the water bus back to your cruise ship. And that's what we did. We are heading to the Orientkai now with a water bus, and from there we're taking a regular bus back to the cruise ship. Of course, from the water bus you can see a bit more of Copenhagen than from the metro, which is running underground, so I can highly recommend at least taking one of the trips from the Orient Kai into the city by water bus. And here we are back at the beautiful AIDAprima. We can see how beautifully she's illuminated by the evening sun, and you can also see quite nicely the location of the balcony cabins down on deck 5. You can see that they are quite close to the waterline. As this cruise was marketed as a winter sport cruise, we had a famous guest on board. Maria Höfel-Riesch, probably the most famous German alpine skier, was on board, and she had a fantastic presentation where she was talking about her life and her career. It was very interesting. In the meantime, we left Copenhagen and we actually just planned to listen to her for a few minutes and then watch the sail away, but it was so interesting that we skipped the sail away and listened to her for the full presentation. Anyway, sailing out of Copenhagen is not too spectacular, as the Ocean Kai is right at the end of the harbor, so there's basically nothing to see. In the evening we had a fantastic dinner at the Casa Nova, another included specialty restaurant. You need to make a reservation here as well. And this time, unlike on AIDA Nova, we also had fantastic service here in the Casa Nova. And then it was time for something typical for AIDA, and that is the silent party. There are 3 DJs playing different music, and you have headphones, and you can always change between those DJs. And that's already the end of day 2, so that's also the end of the video. In the next video we will take a look at days 3, 4 and 5. Here you can see when the video will be uploaded and the name of the song. As always, I'd like to say thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, subscribe or share the video link, and hope to see you in my next video then.